introduce Carol, visiting associate professor at St. John Fisher College. Carol, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank everyone for Mike and Tina for the opportunity to be here and for the presentations we've seen so far. I'm really excited. Had a great dinner last night with Debbie and learning here. I want to talk a little bit about my background, briefly on how it's relevant, talk a little bit about, from my research, the keys to succession planning, a little bit about next generation preparation, ask about some action items, with the caveat that, and I think we just heard that from our presentations from Erin and Dina, that no two families are the same. So while I'll make some comments today about the importance of family meetings and governance and planning, no two families are exactly the same, so I want everyone to really be thinking about what works for themselves and their families. Although this is a little bit hard here, normally speaking, we'd say what happens here stays here, and try and have some confidentiality. And after we're done, if anyone's interested, and Debbie, over by you, I've got some legacy card activities which I'll mention. If anyone really wants to take one, those will be a treat on me. But it's a really fun family activity that I love to do when I work with families. So before I get started, a little bit about myself. I worked at St. Bonaventure University for many years after public accounting work. I was in the business school there. So in that field, I just sort of got involved with family businesses and accounting and management. The field's fairly new in family business. For those of you who are involved in this and taken a deep dive, you know that. Along the way, I worked for a company not real far away in Green, New York called the Raymond Corporation. George Raymond was in Green, New York. He was a family business leader in the world, helped start a bunch of family business networking organizations that are now global, Family Firm Institute, Family Business Network. That was a lot of fun. I made a move to St. John Fisher College after I took a phase out from St. Bonaventure and helped my mother, who passed away last year. Did that routine that happens in our 50s in our life for a lot of us. And now I have an appointment at Cornell University, which is another very important local research, which is how Danny reached out to me, our friends there. And I'm a professor at St. John Fisher College in Rochester, New York, who's starting a new program in family business. I will say to you that on a personal level, which I think matters, our family is, like most families in the world, entrepreneurial. My brother and husband and sister-in-law and our daughter are in a business in Lancaster, New York, selling compressor parts all over the world. It's about 10 employees there. Our son is in Dallas at 29. He's CEO of a company called J.M. Bullion. They have, they're one of the, I think they're rated right now the 13th largest internet retailer in the United States. We were just in Dallas. He won an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award for the Southwest, which was very, very fun. They have about 80 employees that they support, 40 in Dallas and 40 in a shipping facility in Vegas. Then I have our tiny company I call a nonprofit, based out of my service and giving community and nursing homes. And we make Vera Bradley-like bags for nursing home patients, and I give those away. So that's our family. So with 2 children involved, we certainly understand these dynamics, and we certainly understand these dinner table dynamics, etc. So, there's a lot of times my husband comes home, we talk about things, and you have to really think about what our role is in all these relationships. So I've done work with some family firms, mostly through the Chicago Loyola program that I'm a faculty member at. That program is almost 30 years old, one of the most recognized, I think, on the planet. And a lot of those ideas I like to bring to upstate New York that are relevant. My dream is that in upstate New York, we're all working together more to support our family enterprises. That's my dream, especially for the next gens, which I'll talk about in a minute. But one of these, and this is information that I'm allowed to share, Peter Bruckel is a Cornell grad. He is in Avon, New York. He has a nice business. He's Generation 1. He asked me to help with his next-gen development with his 4 children, and I said, what's your vision? And how many of you can relate to this? I'd like what I built to not fall apart. So in a lot of ways, that's what we're thinking about. I think, can anyone relate to that? Is it on your minds? So I really think about these things, and that this is a real marathon. It's a big journey. It's a lot of work, and I'm right there with you, Dina, about that. What we really have to be thinking about and surrounding ourselves with are people who are interested in helping us get to really good places, developing our relationships, etc. And I do share your concern that sometimes we can get involved with advisors who are very, very, cut and dried about protect the business from the family. Did I say that the right way? Right. And so that gives me a lot of fear when I talk to folks, because I'm of a similar mindset to you about how do we all make this work together. So this was a photo here. This is Maggie, whose company owns a big electrical company near Chicago. I asked her if I could share this. It's her screensaver. And I think this, for me, I love using storytelling and pictures and having conversations about family business. I mean, what does this have to do with family business, if anything?
You're all rowing together,
Yeah.
but somebody's leading the ship. That's caller.
And what happens if those of us who've tried rowing, what if we're not rowing together? What will happen in this situation? Literally. Goes in circles. So I love this picture, and I use it all the time to remind me of what we're trying to get to. Everyone rowing together, they're all happy, there's a leader. It really, that's what we're trying to strive for. Now, I think in talking about transitions, and by the way, I don't like talking just about succession planning. That's one thing that happens, but in constantly daily, we go into work and something's going to happen. Someone's unfortunately going to pass away. Someone's going to get sick. Someone's going to have a baby. Some customer is going to say, adios, amigo. All these things are going to happen. So we have to be thinking about all the stakeholders involved and all the potential transitions and how they fit together, not just about the one in the middle in this case. So one of my favorite activities from a colleague, John Davis, who was, some of you must know him, right? So he was at Harvard, and now he's moved to MIT. But he and his mentor, he's in his 60s, right? These are really founders of our field. They put this together to say family businesses are very different than other businesses because of the three-circle model: family, business, and ownership. And when you look at all the different elements, or all the different roles, all the different stakeholders, you see the list over here. One of the really great activities that I like to see families do, next gens in particular, is to talk about where does everyone fit. In the past, when I would work with this in workshops, and I'd use the Trump family because everyone knew them and knew their non-family members from their, apprentice show and that. But I don't do that anymore because I can't keep people on track. So think about your own, and we tend to focus really on number 7, the family owner and CEO, what their transitions. When in fact, to row together, we need to be thinking about all of these. Does that make sense to everyone? So that's a very fun activity, I think, for families to do. All right, so with that in mind, I want to talk about typical roles of those 3 circles, right? So family, when we talk about relationships and things that have to happen and how we get along and make decisions, right? So one of the circles was family governance. We're going to talk briefly about some of these issues that families should be talking about regularly and revisiting, right? So values, why do we want to be in business together? Do we want to be in business together? Sometimes one of the biggest issues we have in family firms is that people are hostages. They can't get out. And in one family business where someone I know was forced to get out because her parents were upset with her about some choice she made, after the parents passed away, the brother said, we'd like to bring you back in. So, how do we make these decisions? How do we communicate, build unity? What about family education and employment policies? And I'm part of a very fun national project right now looking at, does outside experience matter? Because more and more globally, we know from PwC just released a study, Ernst & Young has, that more and more family businesses are 2 things are happening. One is they're saying you have to have outside experience to come in, typically 2 to 5 years. And the other thing they're doing is that they're hiring more and more non-family CEOs. You put that together with the perfect storm that a number of family businesses are selling, right? It's a really great economy for that. And we also know globally that a number of the stakeholders, your son, my children, are kind of in a minimal situation right now, minority, that more and more the research shows, especially from Ernst & Young, that the next gens want to do something else. So when you put that all together, it's some really big challenges for families to think about: inactive shareholders, more of that, things like that. So this is really, I think, one of the very most important things to be working on all the time. Ownership governance is, really those are the shareholders talking about what businesses do we want to be in, what risk will we, what do we want. I've seen families who are really good at these things say, I know that looks like a good acquisition, but we had this criteria for a reason. Either we need to change the criteria, or we aren't going to buy this business, right? So those kinds of things. And they talk about who's going to be on the board. That's something else we'll talk about in a minute. Buy-sell agreements, etc. And then the business governance is really about who's on the board, who's running the company, and big strategic decisions. So I think everyone knows this, but it's good to sort of sit back and think about where do we stand on this if we're owners, right, if we're stakeholders, and also for those of us serving family businesses and next gens, which I do, thinking about where can we help them, which I think Danny and Mike, you're doing such a great job on, and Michelle too, and saying what kind of advisors are out there to help these families get all these stakeholders rowing together. In terms of structures, again, what works with one family might not work for another, but the three circles, family, the three things we typically talk about are having family meetings. A family assembly is like an annual meeting where everyone comes once a year, a big reunion, trying to get everyone together, talking together, etc. And a family council is a representative one where usually all the heavy-duty lifting happens. Who here has one of those? Anybody? Sort of. Okay. So usually the older families businesses get, the more tuned in they are with these things, especially as we'll see in a minute when they have stakeholders all over the nation or planet. In businesses, we'll talk very briefly about this, but in upstate New York, most family businesses, we've done this research, do not have boards, real active boards. And this, I would say to the three of you helping family businesses, this is something I think to really push families on in terms of, do we need advisors, do we need boards, and what do they look like? And at the same time, I'll be, fully transparent that there's pros and cons to everything. So George Raymond, the guy I worked for that makes their company makes Nero aisle forklifts in Great New York, he was one of the pioneers in that with his business, which they went public as well. More non-family members than family members, and in the end, they voted him out, right? So there's risks to this, but they were doing their job. It was probably time for him to move on, very sadly, but it prompted him then to sell the whole company, caused a lot of family problems. Owners, shareholder meetings, and some families have what they call family offices, which we can talk more about. But that's really becoming a trend in this current economy where a number of family businesses are selling, including one of my students, which I'll tell you about if we have time. So some overarching observations that I've seen now being involved in this field for almost 20 years. One of my friends, Freda Hertz-Brown in New York City, a psychologist who's in the field, wrote a book about the unintended consequences of trusts. And one of my friends has phrased this, and I think it's so true, that one of our biggest problems in family business is we're capitalists in the boardroom. We want everything, total, you go out there, you get it, you build it, capitalist, but in the living room, everything's going to be equal. Socialists in the living room. And let's talk a little bit. Thank you. Think about it. Here's how it plays out very quickly. Imagine your own families. Grandma and Grandpa, G1. Grandma and Grandpa, right? 3 children. The 3 children get married. They have a business. How do they divide this up? We know from the research. We know. How do they tend to divide this up? Whether or not they're in the business. 3 ways. So they think they've nailed it. Everything's equal to the penny. We got this. All right, by G3, what's happened? Now you've got branches, right, that are all different, right? And then what happens when you get to G4? Like one of the families that I know very well, and the CEO is number 16. This is the CEO who has a minority interest. So how does that work for governance? So it gets very, very complicated. And one of the things we have to think about is that what worked for G1 might not work for G2, G3, and G4. So we have to constantly be thinking about governance and decision-making processes and making families strong enough and wanting to talk to each other enough that they can get through whatever's going to happen and come their way. And actually with G5, it's a non-family CEO for the family I just mentioned, so it's another big change. So we know from our research, nationally and globally, that there's 3 things, this is not rocket science, there's 3 things we know that have to happen. So I'm working with next gens, where I think, and families too, in business, but where I think we can have the most potential for someone like me at a college is to prepare the next gens, and now we're even piloting high school programs, that if we can prepare them for some of these challenges earlier and earlier on, that they might gain the bench strength to not have the same issues we have, or at least to the extent. So we need family governance, we need regular family meetings, we know, from those families who've done transitions well. We need strategic planning, and not just saying we have one, but written. I'll talk about that research we did in a minute. And we need governing business boards that really, really function and meet and add value. So a few things about them quickly, and see if you have any questions. Family meetings. So a couple of my colleagues from the other big family business center in the United States is at Kennesaw State. I think they were the first in Atlanta. The Cox Family Business Center, all endowed, very fine researchers, endowed chairs there, everything. So they did some research about cohesion, companies that have lasted for over 100 years in Europe, right? So they learned this. They defined cohesion: high desire to remain in the group, low desire to leave, lack of coercion. So if I say, you know what, I've had it with all of you, thank you, Mom and Dad, I want to get out, they can. And lack of fear of being held hostage. So that I don't think there's any surprises here. So their research confirmed it. And just very quickly, and I have some notes on this if you want it, but there's activities we can do with families and next gens to think about how do we build this to have a more unified family, cohesive family, which we know are their greatest strategic advantages. So they came up with these 4 dimensions of cohesion: family emotional, building the family together, family meetings, family calendars, etc. Business emotional. You know, one of my favorite stories is when George Raymond said, I'm going to sell this company and I need all the kids to come in with me to make this happen and to have enough shares. His daughter said, Dad, but our building is next door to the school and we look out and every baseball team in Little Green, New York has Raymond on the back of their shirts. I'm pretty proud of that. What does that mean for this situation? I love that story. Family financial, so it keeps us together because our family has resources. We have real estate, we have a lake house, those kinds of things, trusts, offices, and business financial, right? So the dividends, the things that come out of being in business together. So this here, and this is a tight worksheet. This has many, many examples of how working with the family, you might say, what are we going to focus on? How are we going to build our cohesion? And I have a copy of this for anyone who'd want it, but I gave you a little overview of that. Does anyone have a question or comment on that? Pretty straightforward? Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about family, building family bench strength, our family governance. I want to talk a little bit, so the things that families would work on, that I've been in these kind of family governance meetings, talk a lot about values, right? And we all know from the business world that that's the hub of how we make decisions, how we stay together, and how we can keep it all together. We know that. Vision, just like from your strategy courses, where do we see ourselves in the future? Mission, what are we doing now? Strategies, how will we do it? Policies that relate to if you have to have outside experience, those kinds of things. And then the structures we talked about, they do this through assemblies, councils, representative foundations, and offices. And I have a legacy card activity I'll show you at the end, which is what we typically use for a very fun discussion activity to talk about vision. So just a couple of comments on these, but these are the kinds of things families should be working on to make big decisions. So this, going back to Peter Bruckel, so it took a long time, took individual exercises, took small group exercises, but here's one example of their core values. And not just, you see that there's a definition, respect, and then it's defined. And even give examples. And then every meeting you come in and you go over, every month or every quarter, how do we do on our values? Can someone give an example? Are these still relevant? So you see here, respect, accountability, integrity, leadership, growth, and unity. And somewhere in there they had fun. How many of you have seen these in family businesses? And they have it in all their enterprises. Yeah, so it's good stuff, and you keep coming back to this, and it's very, very healthy for the family, and to go back to this when they're making big decisions. Vision statements, where do we see ourselves down the road? This takes a really long time to do. It has to be kind of vague, and it has to be willing to change, right? So here's one I love. I've got 2 examples quickly. Our family is closely knit with evolving relationships among members. We demonstrate loving kindness, tolerance, and trust. We have ongoing education and participation in the family. We're enterprising. Our investments provide positive returns and reflect our values. We have a positive impact on our community, and we embrace our values. Vague, can last a long time, and also might not be relevant forever. Has to be reviewed. I love this one. It goes back to Dina's talk about, we have a deep bench, and the work we're going to hear about in a few minutes from Debbie. We have a deep bench of qualified leaders and directors advancing the family and business interests in alignment with our shared values. This I love, again, because it gets into the thing about a business not being, family not being the enemy of a business, All right, so our family governance system ensures that the family is the best possible partner to the business, is one of the things they say. And I can give you this too. This took a lot. This took probably a year for them to put together and agree on. All right, here's a favorite one. So I was in the Southern Tier at St. Bonaventure. A good friend of ours are the Stitt families who make Cutco knives. How many of you have that? Cutco knives, the ones sold door to door. So this is one of their products. I love the red, but they're mostly black and white. But this is what they say their mission, what they do is. One sentence: we provide opportunities for our business associates, family members, and community. It's a little bit tighter, but that's what Jim is all about. This is Jim, so he's G2 and she's G3, going to, oh my gosh, she's going to school in Ohio. I'm forgetting the name of it right now. Also where he went to school, and she's doing everything she needs to get ready. Totally into this. Really, really excited about it. She led our high school focus group. I could talk to you about the results of that as well if you're interested. All right, a little bit about strategic planning. I think we all know what that is. So in 2002, we did a study of 1,043 family businesses across the country. We did that in collaboration with Babson College, a London Business School, Kennesaw, Loyola, everybody on board. And as part of that, we got the owner of the New York Times, some big businesses to participate. And I called him and said, thank you. Can I come and meet with you to interpret the results? And we had a Cornell PhD in stats do the stats, because I wanted to be transparent. I wanted everyone to push us and give them the data, etc. But I wanted to make sure we were good to go. And he said, I'll help you if you give me the data and I can do it myself. Great. He said, okay, come on down. So he's giving me a tour, and on the wall he had this quote. He had pictures of all these famous people with all of his family members. He was G4. Dwight Eisenhower planning. Plans are nothing, and planning is everything. What do you think about that?
Well, it's a paper, but if you don't do anything with it, I think that's the difference that I found in my own business. Is I've seen a lot of businesses with strategic plans that are merely just it's a plan, but it's not worked.
Or it isn't regularly updated or checked in with.
If people don't know what it says, and it's not really a guide for where the business is going, there's no accountability, there's no,
And we know from doing this work that we're going to go in tomorrow and something's going to make the plan irrelevant, even if it was good today. So also this is about building bench strength, that the more we plan, when things come up, the better shape we're in to talk about what we should do and why. And so we had a really fun conversation about that, and I just think it's relevant, and it was just a fun thing. So in our research of 1,043 businesses, the statistician called me up and she said, you're not going to believe this. You are not going to believe this. We got this correlation. We can't say it's cause and effect. But this is what we learned, which is not surprising. All these things go together, thinking ahead. 80% of the firms in the survey said, I absolutely have a strategic plan. Sure, every CEO says that. No kidding. 1/3 said they had a written. Those that had a written plan strongly correlated with all these other things we tested and asked about. Formal redemption plans, buy-sell agreements, formal valuations. You see the list here. More employees, higher sales revenue. They've selected a successor. It's important. These all go together. So when you're working with family businesses, if you are one, thinking about where is it, who knows it, how are we building this, etc., it's really, really important. You know, I said to someone, and this won't surprise you, a big real estate developer I wrote a case study on. And we have a whole bunch, by the way, we have a whole bunch of upstate New York case studies on a website called Upstate Family Business that could be used for anybody that was funded. They're very fun. But I said to him, what's your succession plan? He said, you sound like my banker. That's the only one I talked to about this. I said, well, you know, it's got to be put out there. Okay, quick note on boards. What have I got, a couple minutes, Mike?
We're going to cut out my part, so you have till 9:50, so you got 13 more minutes.
Oh, thank you. Okay, great. So, business governance, very important, and also, again, very rarely done in upstate New York, right? St. John Fisher did a study 2 years ago, found that very few have them. Legally, everybody probably has to have one, depending on your structure, which we talked about a little bit earlier. But I want to talk about this, about who can we talk to? Who are our peers? How do we get advice? You know, it's lonely at the top. The CEO of the chairman and publisher of the New York Times, Arthur Sulzberger, said that to me. It's lonely at the top. He got a 360 done, and he said, I went to my farmhouse to recover for a few days after I interpreted the results. I've heard that from others too, right? Lonely at the top, getting feedback is really important. How do you bring it on? Bring on the feedback. That's my thinking. All right, so in an informal way, it's family and friends. And I would put in this bottom category too, advisors, our lawyer, our accountant, our trusted advisors. And we know that we've done this national study every 5 years, many times when I referred to earlier, but we know that for years and years and years, the accountant was the #1 trusted advisor until the last time it was done, and then it was the spouse. Just quite interesting too, and lawyer is below them. And I'm not saying that lawyers shouldn't be trusted, but accountants, you think about, they have all the data all the time, right? Hopefully. So employee input, industry associations, peer groups, right? So there's Vistage, it's another thing I think that we could be offering as people who help family businesses, confidential peer groups, which we're trying to introduce with the next gens, which I'll talk about very briefly. Board of advisors, which are non-fiduciaries, so that's getting folks together. And this too, the research, we've learned, you get out of it what you put into it. So if you pay them, the research shows that the advice they give you tend to like better, not a big shock, right? And if you don't pay them, you're not as happy with the research and they don't come as much and add as much value, all right? So it's a good step if you want to dip your toe in and think about who should be on. The other issue is, if you've got paid advisors in terms of your accountant, attorney, family business consultants, whatever the case might be, they should have a role with this, but you also want to develop your board of advisors with people who are going to push back on you. People who are going to make you think hard about the industry, think hard about family dynamics, non-family CEO issues, etc. So it's really an opportunity to test how would this work, do I want to do it, and who would be a good fit, right? And having terms is very important, which is also very problematic in family businesses. If I had to rank going to board of directors, fiduciary boards, the most important contribution I've ever made to a family business, it was when there were a couple of family members who, there were not terms on the board, they had non-family managers, and there were a couple of family members who were very large shareholders, and they needed to make room for some ones who were developing to come up. And it didn't seem like rocket science, to be honest, and I thought about it, and we had some conversations, and I said, is there a consideration that we could talk about, the family could talk about a status of emeritus, like we do at colleges and universities, an emeritus board member? And ultimately they worked through it, they talked through the transition, they had a big party for these ladies, they let them come to future meetings and participate and all of that. But if you're going to take this step, you have to be really diligent. Their job is to hold management accountable and also to hold themselves accountable. How are they developing future board members? What are their terms, etc.? So this is the spectrum of business governance, and we know it's critically important to transition planning to have those resources there. All right, this was just in Forbes this week. This was the article, I kind of did this backwards. Looking up to your game, create your own board of advisors. So we heard about this earlier, having a personal board of advisors, right? We all do it at some level. And there's a great article I give to the next gens from the Harvard Business Review about creating who's your personal group of advisors, people you tell everything to, and they can overlap. Operational, who do you work with in whatever environments, and strategic, who can get you to the next level, right? Most of us are weak on the strategic one, right? So it's a nice conversation for them to think about in their development plan, how do they build this? Here's what the article starts out with. You think you know yourself? Chances are you're completely underestimating your strengths, overblowing your weaknesses, and missing some valuable insights into what makes you special, unique, and professionally desirable. So I really think about, I'd like to think a lot about who do we surround ourselves with to help us with these transitions, right? And give us input we need, and sometimes input that we don't see. Okay, so next gen development. So there's about 150 programs around the United States that do something with family business, right? It could be a class, it could be a full-blown center, Cornell endowed with $10 million, right? And we get together once a year. And the other venue, and we just had a meeting in June, very fun, but the other venue we do now is that many of us have family business clubs for students to get together, whether they're in a family business or not, right? To get them talking about their issues that are different than their roommates who aren't, in a family business and might not totally understand it. And at the same time, we want to provide opportunities for those in accounting and management majors who are going to go to work for family firms, serve them, etc. All right, so it turns out that Columbia University hosts every year a forum for family business clubs of only the Ivy institutions, which really ticked me off. And this year it did. You know, let's be inclusive. Let's be collaborative. This year they opened up to everyone. So I dressed up. I got together with one of our smartest students who's in a family business, going to work in New York City in CPA. A lot of going for her. And I said, let's go down and let's see what they have to talk about. They had an alum talk, and he told his story about his family's wine company, the situations that happened, the transitions, many difficult ones, many highs, many lows, and then his own entrepreneurial efforts. Very successful young man in his early 40s. They did Q&A, and the room was jammed. There was probably a couple hundred people there, and after every student got their question answered, I looked around, and finally the moderator said any more, and I put up my hand because I wanted to make sure every student had their question answered. And I said, John, if you had the distinct privilege, as many of us do like I do, total gift, of working with next gens, whether they're Columbia, upstate New York, wherever, what's one thing you would do? And he thought about it, and he said what I think is our biggest opportunity. I would create a safe environment where multi-generational difficult discussions could happen. I still have difficult conversations with my father. They're still hard for me. And so while we talk about these peer groups, one of the things we're trying to dip our toe into is some programming regularly with Next Gen and Now Gens, as we call them, going through some programming together. Because I think if we're going to make a difference in family businesses, that's where the real hard, heavy-duty lifting has to happen, in addition to everything else. Okay. So we started a Next Gen Leadership Institute, and my dream, as I said, would be to have an upstate New York kind of forum for all these young folks. So love to see if there would be a connection for us upstate and the Adirondacks as well. So we've got a cohort running. It's a year-long program, and it involves the Next Gens primarily and the Now Gens periodically, as mentioned. They have confidential issue processing peer group facilitation, led by someone who's Vistage and YPO trained. I help co-lead monthly leadership programmings. The first thing that we're working on is managing ourselves with a non-anonymous 360 led by a local company that does these, so non-anonymous, helping them have these difficult conversations. It doesn't help us if everyone says you're not a good listener. Tell me more about that. And in the meantime, helping to carefully build relationships with the people around you that you're asking for feedback from. We have a unit on managing relationships with others, family dynamics, which is always the fun stuff. And then we have some business sections on, what I can't stand, I'll say to students, raise your hand if you're not good at numbers. Please be honest. So some hands go up. And I said, please don't ever say that again. Whatever it's going to take for us to get you, no. If you say that, or if you say, I don't need to know, someone explain it, what happens? People don't take you serious. So I'm really serious about this. It might be the accountant in me, but I'm really serious because the numbers tell the story about the business and in estate planning about the family. So they asked, when we did a focus group, which we could do here too, right? I believe that I don't have all the answers. So when someone says, will you help put a program together? Yes, but I want to test it. So this particular group said, we want a lot more information on being good owners and estate planning and all that. So we have experiences, because what we do know from the outside experience research is that students need more experience. And so they do tours of other businesses. We'll go to Ledestri Foods in a couple weeks, and live case studies like kind of what happened here today. And then they put together a personal board of advisors. Okay. Outside research, very quickly. So we did a national funded study. We did interviews in the Midwest and the East Coast primarily. And here's the takeaway. So we interviewed companies that were at least 3 generations old. Half of them had outside experience. Half of them came up through the ranks. They both doing well financially, etc., agreed to participate. Very interesting. Here's the takeaway. Outside experience is not what creates success, right? Everyone is requiring more and more outside experience, but there's no research to say, if you're going to do it, does it make sense, and under what conditions? So that's what we're trying to really peel apart for families so that they can get this right. So what we have learned is that if the inside plan goes well, the outside experience is an accelerator. It can help them, all right? Inside experience is critical and more important, it turns out. How it's done, however. which I'll talk about in just a second. Generational patterns matter, the generational differences, and that should be any part of any good family business program, especially as everyone's living longer. Here's one of the big ticket items. Onboarding is so important. Generally speaking, when you come up through the organization as it's your whole career, you know everything. Somehow you've been in wherever, somebody had a baby, you were over here, you know everything. But more and more families, businesses are saying, you have to have outside experience. And when you come in, there has to be a job description. You are not special. There has to be a job opening. And we're going to treat you like everybody else. So in my case, for example, I would have gone into accounting, right? Into my grandfather's cheese factory, for example. Right? I would have gone into the accounting department because that was where I could hold my own. But that's very dangerous because that sets a stage that I'm not getting training all the way around. So it's really, really important. The other thing that's hysterical is outside experience definition. So I said to these folks, tell me about your outside experience. How long was it? And in a number of cases, it was, my father set me up. I worked for my father's friend for 2 years. Same industry, different state. I learned so much. Well, what we learned that they bring back is onboarding at other companies. They learned that really well because they went through that, by the way. But is that really, usually outside experience is about building credibility. I had to get the job myself. I had to have a resume. I got evaluated. I might have gotten fired. I might have gotten promoted on my own. So a number of these people who say they have to go get outside experience, in fact, the parents set it up. The family, we interviewed the person, the CEO. We interviewed another family member who worked there a long time and a non-family member who was there a long time. You won't be shocked to know that the family members and non-family members who had outside experience absolutely preferred it. And when they worked for someone who didn't, they were extremely critical. Extremely critical. These were confidential interviews. And vice versa. Family members who came up the ranks might be sometimes resentful of siblings or outsiders who came in, non-family members with outside experience, kind of skeptical, you don't know this business. So it's a really important thing in thinking about next gens. Any questions on that? So this is just some more about some questions. And this is a great quote. My friend interviewed a bunch of people, very famous people around the globe, who were a book on successors, and I can give that to you if you're interested in Andrew Kite's book. But this is my favorite quote from Bill Wrigley. So it's in the book. Bill Wrigley talked about he got on an airplane to go make a deal and went in the bathroom and got ill because he was so stressed out. He knew what his father wanted or what was expected, and he knew where they needed to go. And he said he really thought about this quote, and at all times when he follows this, it works. We must respect the past, but at all times, do what's right for the future. I love that quote. I can share with you the legacy cards. I'd be curious from your feedback so I can learn. Bring it on. What's one takeaway from anything I said today that matters to you? If you wouldn't mind sharing.
We've had a lot of questions from businesses about that sort of outside experience versus inside experience. Or, no, I wouldn't say a lot, but a number of them. So it was nice to hear a little bit more about that.
So, good. That's good to know.
The values thing was interesting to me, like as a way to guide future decisions, and then just kind of mirroring that kind of touchy-feely business part with the stuff that needs to happen, making decisions, business part. It seems like that makes a lot of sense. I would have never thought to do that.
I'll say what was very interesting for me sitting here working for a multi-generational company is so much of what they do in relation to what you talked about. It's like, I'm very fortunate to work for this organization because they do a lot of that. One thing that I would have thought of is in a lot of the mission statements, they're very much are about their family, and it's kind of very personal of their family. And what I find in our mission statement is that it's a family-owned business, but then it kind of incorporates the staff. So it's like they kind of expand it that we are all the family, and they very much take into account employee, what we think, and they don't just make the decisions themselves. They really reach out to the whole corporation. So, yeah, it's interesting.
why you go in and row so well.
That's right.
What did you get out of it? I know you're gonna talk next, tie-ins or anything?
I think I think the one piece of your presentation that I think we don't talk enough about in family business situations is the governance piece. And so I think that's an important look at. And I know I've run into situations where there's been family businesses and when you have the slide up there that showed the all the different connections. One of the first ones is the outlaws, which is you have the spouse, you have the next generation up there plus the spouses, but the spouses may not be part of the business, but they have a big say in their mind as to what's going on in that business. So it adds another level of complexity in some of the ones I've seen.
And some of the ones I've seen that are really well-oiled machines have onboarding for them.
Nice.
Yeah, orientation.
Yep.
It's a big issue.
I know, at the Chamber, we work with a lot of small family businesses, and I think your idea or, practice of having a board would really help them. I'm just curious how that onboarding goes, to get them to share, their family business with someone that's not in the family, that's so small and close-knit. So I think it'd bring a lot of value. I'm just curious how it plays out.
Yeah, well, the folks who are really experienced at this, like Loyola in Chicago, they help family businesses do searches for the board, actually like a search firm. So that could be a role that you could help, you want to do this, let's talk about what the skill sets would be, let's help you, put some feelers out and think about who you might like to talk to and interview about this. That's another area that you might be able to help. All right, so I'll leave you with, if you want when you leave, I have very quickly these legacy cards. This is an activity we do with students and families where I'll just show a card or two, but you have them get together, you have the people individually look at all these photos and talk about the picture of the legacy that represents it was handed to them. I love the conductor one. And then talk about the legacy they want to hand off to others. It's just a nice activity. So if anyone wants to take one, it's on me, and thank you very much.
Great. Nicole, do you have a plug-in for this?
Oh, yeah. Oh, dispense it.
We're so pleased to have Debbie here as well, and Mike did a good job of introducing her in the very beginning, so I won't go too much into that again and let her talk about her own experience. But Debbie, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the stage up here.
So good morning, and I'm very happy to be here and get to know you and talk to you a little bit more. So as was mentioned earlier in my introduction, most of my background is in human resources and have been a dual certified, accredited human resources professional, yada, yada, yada. But for the past 8 years, I had been a consultant, business advisor for a nonprofit organization that is based here in Potsdam. I was in the Plattsburgh office, called SciTech. And we were part of what was called the MEP, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which basically just means we're nonprofit, partially funded by state and federal money. And there's at least one MEP in every state in the United States. It just so happens with the size of New York, there's 10. And we were the North Country Center, so we basically went from Lake Champlain to Lake Ontario. And during that time, I spent a lot of time going into small companies that may not have had an HR person, a full-time HR person. A lot of small companies don't. They have somebody that, somebody in finance or somebody in admin, or one of the owners, or the owner's spouse may do finance. So it started to be kind of a dovetail into, I was afraid I trampled on wire. A dovetail into working with small families, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go through the Galliard Family Business Institute. You heard Dina talk about them. Dina's worked with Lisa Stewart before, who was the founder, and become a level 2 certified family business advisor. So that allowed me to talk about some of the things that we have. My kind of claim to fame was more in the people side, the HR development, people development side, leadership development. So I would help companies with their succession plan and how are they going to get people to that next level that they needed to be at to fulfill the needs that they're going to have in the organization. So, excuse me, so my husband and I both semi-retired, and we were kind of working 3 days a week, and we both realized that we still really like doing this. So just recently we started our own little consulting business, and when the slide comes back up, you'll see PCS there. It's Pettit Consulting Services. My husband had it from probably 10 years ago or 14 years ago. We've been in the North Country now for 15. So we kind of teamed up together to do some things. And so unfortunately, I don't have any new business cards yet because they were supposed to be here in time, but they didn't get here in time. But so I'm sitting here thinking, going, so now we kind of have this little family business. So it'll be interesting to see how this all goes. But we're pretty excited about this next venture. So again, I've spent a lot of time traveling across the North Country and working with small to medium-sized companies and helping them understand, what it means for the generation that's in the business already, and the struggle sometimes that it is to bring in the next generations, and to have, it's a tough one. I've seen companies where the expectation was there that junior or juniorette were going to come in there and take over the business, but nobody ever had a discussion with, did that fit their life plan? I've seen where they were bringing in junior or juniorette and they shouldn't even be thinking about it. It's just, we're dealing with people and we're dealing with those dynamics. So again, I think somebody else has mentioned it. It's been mentioned over and over. There is no cookie cutter process that you can lay out and say, if you do step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you'll be successful. There's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of ideas out there. And that's why, I think what Danny and Mike are doing and bringing people together and bringing in all these things to get people to start thinking about them and decide what makes it the most for them. Am I doing these? Sure. Am I doing these?
I can do the transitions for you if you like. You can just say next.
Okay.
I can be like here.
I'm a traveler.
No, you travel. You travel.
I like to walk around. Usually have a clicker in my hand. I was thinking I was
Nope,
born
sorry
with a
about that.
clicker in my hand. No, that's
Is
fine.
this the slide you want to be on?
That's the second slide.
The one after?
Yep.
This one? Our reality check? All right. It's right there.
That's
if you want to see.
it. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
All right. So, one of the things that, there's a lot of research out there, a lot of great research being done. And one of the things that we have to think about is when we look at this, and this is kind of national data, but we find that it's the same thing here in the North Country. 85% of American business owners say, I want to pass my business on to the next generation. It's very important to me. I built this up. I want to pass it on. But only 30% are actually successful in taking it from the first generation to the second. And if you look at second, third, fourth, and fifth, the numbers go down exponentially. Have you seen that, Carol, in the data that you've got? So why do you think that is?
Lots of reasons, I think. Readiness, ability, interest. Sometimes the owners don't really facilitate that change. People can't do it like they do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like holding on to that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times they rely on the sale of the business or for their own retirement, so they don't make it possible for the next generation to purchase that business.
And I worked with a company. I mean, that's a really good point. I worked with a company, and when I went in and said, what's your long-term plan?
Yeah.
And they had just recently bought that company from another family member. And their response was, I want to do whatever I can to make this as big as I can so that I can sell it and have that money to retire. So that's okay. There's all kinds of different plans out there. But then, we've talked about transparency and some of these other things. Do you think it's easy to get employees on board if they think that the only reason that they're there is to help somebody make money so they can retire with more money? And that's not the point, but the point is, we don't think about everybody that's in the business together. Which one do I?
Yeah, you just forward.
Just that one.
Yeah, forward or backward, depending on where you want to go. I don't know what's going on. It should forward or backward should work. Yes.
There we go.
There we go.
Maybe it timed out a
All
little bit.
right.
All right, so reality check 2 is more than 8 out of 10 family businesses don't have a succession plan. They just think that this stuff is going to organically happen or naturally happen or whatever. So you mentioned, Carol, the PricewaterhouseCoopers surveys. So here's what with one of their surveys that they recently had, they said, the all-important issue of succession has still not been fully grasped or effectively addressed by far too many. So when you look deeper at this, a lot of companies said they have a succession plan in place for some or all of their senior roles. So the next question was asked, where is it? Is it documented? Does everybody know what that plan is? Are you working that plan? And what do you think the answer was to that? No. So, we talked about plans, but a plan that's not written down really isn't a plan. And yes, they need to be living, breathing documents, and they're going to change all the time, and they should be dog-eared and coffee-stained, but they're still important. You need to have them. If you don't have a written down plan, it's somebody's idea, and their idea may not match other people's ideas. So it's really important that we kind of devote some time to making sure that we've got our enterprise set up for success and making sure that everybody understands and is on board.
I'm just having a bad tech day.
Okay. So, a little bit of a game plan. And I always look at this with begin with the end in mind. So, what is your exit strategy? It may be to sell the company and make a bunch of money. That's okay. That's a strategy. It may be to pass it on to the next generation. There's a lot, again, there's no cookie cutter. Everybody's exit strategy may be a little different, but you need to have one. And it's amazing how many companies I've talked to in the North Country that you've got somebody in a senior role and they're really ready, they're getting ready to leave. They just haven't told anybody. And there's no plan for what they're going to do next. They just think it's going to happen, or they think the kids are going to come in and take it over. And so, we really have to have that strategic plan. You need to know how do I want to do this? And then develop that strategic plan. And Carol talked about that, how we're going to do it. How are we going to get there? And then one of the things that we don't really think about is the competencies that it's going to take to get to that next level. And especially if this is, if it doesn't necessarily, your strategic plan, your exit strategy, I've been in companies where they don't have a next gen that's interested. So then what's that going to be? Or do they have a trusted, I work with one company who the woman is, she's had some medical issues. She's loved this organization. She's brought it to where it is, but she doesn't really have family members that are interested in it. It's like a tri-state business, but she's got a trusted number 2 who's been in the business with her now for a few years, and that's really her heir apparent. So we worked with them to start to build the succession plan that everybody knew that, everybody understood that, and that we started to make sure that this gentleman had the competencies that he is going to need, and it has a plan to develop those. And then, you're really looking at what's your preliminary succession strategy. Now, so this is your long term, but how are you gonna get there? So what are the steps that you're gonna take to be able to get there? If you're hiring, if you're gonna hire to fill some of those gaps, one of the things that you need to make sure that you're doing is actually recruiting, not just for those technical competencies, but for what we call the behavioral competencies as well. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. The one that I use the most is through a company called Career Architect and Michael Lominger, and it's card sort. So you have 62 cards that have these behavioral competencies on, and you sort those out through a process where what's this position need to have, and how many do you think most people in the first card sort, how many cards do you think end up in that pile after reading them? Half the time, 62. It's really getting down to what's the nice to have, what's the I'd like to have, and what are the ones that are really critical. And so you start to look at those critical competencies, because from there you can start to develop a leadership development plan. It doesn't have to be. One of the things I tell people is make it simple to start with. So you take a flip chart and you put, okay, here is where I am. And here's the competencies that I've brought to this business. And here's the ones that we think we need to continue with. And over here you have the person you've identified in the succession plan. And then you look at it and say, of these things, what do they have already? What are the ones that they need the most work on? And then you start to develop maybe a 2 or 3 step plan on here's how we're going to get there. And I'll show you some examples, in a minute. We also have to hold people accountable. And that doesn't matter if they're from inside or outside the family or the business. They still have to be held accountable for their actions and the results that they bring to the table as well. I see that be another issue. We're bringing the next gen in. They aren't necessarily prepared. They aren't necessarily, if they were an employee that we had hired from off the streets, we'd be having different conversations with them. But because they're not, because they're a family member, we find that we have a tendency to let those things go. What's the downfall of that? Well, it's never resolved. They don't learn from it because they're not getting the feedback that they're not doing it correctly. And what's it do to the rest of the employees in the organization?
Yeah. Well, I think that's like a confusion over where they stand, what's going to happen. Some things get enforced, some things don't. And I think you lose a lot of respect because ultimately, I think as long as we're fair and we're clear and we do hold people accountable, and we're consistent with that, I think as a leader, people develop a lot of confidence in the ability of that organization to really sustain over the long term.
Absolutely.
And I think it's like parenting, Debbie. I mean, I think about it that way. If kids know they can go to this one, go to that one, and we had this at our own business when my dad was kind of quasi still in that role and gone a lot of the year. Some people, they didn't like what I said, they went to him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he recognized, he said, this is not working. I'm like, bingo, this is not, it was usually over something ridiculous, like should I play in this golf tournament, which I could have cared less about, And I think it's very important to have accountability in who's in charge and who's making those final decisions.
There's 2 things that you have to have from your employees at the top for them to really follow you. If you're going to be that leader in the front, what do you think they are?
I think respect is, and not just because you're the leader, but because they truly respect you.
It's trust and respect.
Yeah.
And if you break that trust or respect line, what happens?
Well, they won't follow, for
They
one
won't
thing.
follow.
One of the things that I found too is that trust is something that you kind of need to check in with people on, because I can tell you from personal experience, one of the things that I did is I would say, like out loud, if I thought I was over some difficult thing, I would just say, look, we're over this, we're moving on. And if I wasn't over it, I needed to just say that. And that became a trust type thing. It's like, just be authentic with me.
Yes.
And so I think trust is kind of interesting. Like, people trust me. I'm a very trustworthy person. But if my words and maybe my body language aren't in alignment, that we have to watch kind of those things too, because people watch everything we do.
Absolutely.
And it's what you wear to how you conduct yourself to what you're saying in this meeting or that, and it's like being under a microscope of how you live your life. And so I just noticed that's, trust is one of those things that you kind of have to do the nuances of what trust means.
And you're absolutely right. We pride ourselves on being trustworthy and all of this, but sometimes just by the way we looked at somebody or the way we said something can, take some money out of that trust jar. So we do have to always be watching that. The other thing that we have to do is make sure that as we have people that are transitioning in or transitioning out, we have to have a strategy on how that's going to work. And kind of to your point with your dad, I've seen this before where you've got the person that had been at the top, had started the business, done a great job, is absolutely 100% behind the family member that is coming in or the group of family members that are coming in, but they still come to work every day, they still go into their office every day, they still go out on the plant floor or the office or whatever every day and do the same things that they always did. So the employees, who do you think they go to? Because that's just the norm. So, and I had one person say to me, but I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't come into this office every day. So that's part of your succession plan. That's part of your exit strategy. What am I going to do after this? What do I do in the next chapter of my life?
I think if I can just say something
Sure.
about that, one of the most creative young ladies I met who was taking over company prompted her father, who was doing this, by saying, I need you to go run the Spain operation. So I mean, it's the next gen can propose ideas too.
Yeah.
She had a Spain operation.
Create one.
Well, I do think, though, and I do this a lot with my dad, because he has to have a meaningful responsibility, and the business is really tied up in, he says that to me. And so what he does is he manages our agency's 401k plan. One of the things he does is he meets with each employee personally, has a huge interest in people's wealth and their abilities to take care of themselves into retirement. He kind of devotes himself to this as well as a couple other things, and I do a lot of talking with him about what an impact and a positive impact, and I mean that. And I think that people really benefit from that time with him, because people have not learned the strategy of how to take care of your personal wealth.
Yeah.
And we call him the Godfather in a way, because he's like that. He can carry himself that way. I do think, to your point, it's really that balance within the family is, how does everybody have a meaningful responsibility that truly is meaningful, because people want to feel valued in their life. And he's done a tremendous amount of work. I think that's, and if you're really not getting along, but we've always gotten along. So I guess that becomes that foundation again too. Yeah.
But what's important there is he's got a purpose in the organization
Yes.
now. And one that everybody respects.
Right.
And he's great at it, and it's not just, I'm coming in here and somebody else is making the decisions I used to make.
Yeah, well, and he never has done that, Debbie. And I also think about that he does not undermine my decisions that I make. And I think it's very important, just even collectively across an organization, that we're very careful about what we consistently say in this setting, we say in another.
Yes.
That we don't go around talking about other people without that person being the person that you're talking with and having a common understanding. So this big foundation of communication, which is within the family, within the organization, is always huge.
Yeah. And some of the things we're talking about is making sure we're leading by example. That we're doing the things that we say we're going to do, and celebrate successes. I know Dina's organization does a great job at that, and I think that's one of the reasons why they were voted. It was number 4.
Yeah.
Best small businesses in the state of New York. I've been over there. I've done things with them when they're celebrating, and they do a great job. But we forget to do that. We forget to step back, and we're always looking forward to what has to happen next week, and we forget sometimes to really just celebrate. So this is just a quick slide from the Center for Creative Leadership, which I get a lot of information from, and it's just basically what they're saying here is People look at a list of skills, and of the top 5 needs, if you look, commitment, strategic planning, leading people, resourcefulness, employee development. When they ask people about that, only resourcefulness is considered to be a top 10 skill. Yes, we need to be resourceful, but we also need to be able to do these other things, because in the work that they've done, they found that the weakest competencies for today's leaders are leading people and the strategic planning and inspiring commitment and managing change. And so, we need to make sure that when we're looking at our next gen or our succession plan, we need to step back and say, have I developed my people enough in these areas that are really important to lead our organization forward? So in organizational planning, it's some of the things that we've already talked about. We really need to make sure that everybody understands, that we and everybody else understands the culture and the needs of not only the organization, but the family and where we're going in the future. So we have had to have had those conversations. And that's a little bit about what Carol was saying, and what we've been talking about is that doesn't always happen at the level that it needs to happen. We need to step back and look at our organization, and this is one of the things that we were helping the other company that I was talking about that has the woman who wants to transition out, and we kind of did a gap analysis for her entire leadership team. Where are they? What are their skills? What are their weaknesses? What are the things they would need to be in to fit that job description that we're developing for the next generation of that leadership team, and make sure that all of that fits into the strategic plan, but we are actually identifying the talents and skills that people need for that position. How are we going to, sometimes, depending on who's coming in next and what we're going to do, and part of that exit strategy and succession plan is, do we have to do some restructuring? Are we going to have the right people in the right roles? That's not easy to do. I mean, in my career, I've had to do an awful lot of restructures. From big ones, I spent most of my career with International Paper Company, and I've had to not only downsize a plant in half, but eventually sell it and close it. So, those aren't easy conversations to have. Small family business, hopefully you won't have those, but when you start looking at what is our strategy, what's our future, do we have the right players in the right roles? And just because somebody's been there for 20 years doesn't mean necessarily that they're in the right role. And those are hard things that we have to, as a family business is stepping back and making sure that we're doing that. And then we have to look for that silver tsunami. Who in the organization is getting ready to retire? Now, I do work for that outside of family businesses. There's a lot of people that have had the same people in the same roles in these small companies and have to think, all of a sudden I'm going to end up with all my knowledge walking out the door because it's in their heads, and they're going to soon retire. Now, we know in the world of HR, we can't ask somebody when they're going to retire. So, it's really part of that whole planning process that we have to go through.
But you can get a feel for what people are thinking.
You can get a feel for what they're thinking.
And I mean, you can never guarantee anything about what anybody is doing ever. What I've been doing more of, even with that, is trying to have some of those really good conversations around what people, and if they're not fulfilled in what they're doing and they want something else, can they build that into what they're doing? What opportunities are people looking for? Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you can't say, okay, what day are you going to retire?
Yeah.
But you can say, how's
Right.
things going?
Right.
What are your plans? What are your goals? What are your personal goals? And have those kind of
You kind of like tease it out a little
Yeah.
bit so that we have
How do you
some.
see yourself in 5 years?
I know.
How's that new boat?
I actually was doing that with a group of supervisors and do some leadership training and coaching. And the one guy looked at me and goes, nobody's ever asked me that before.
Yeah.
And I thought,
That's
how
sad.
sad is that,
Yeah.
So this is kind of what we've been talking about, just kind of laid it out a little bit. Sometimes people need to kind of see it in steps. So, we want to identify those competencies that that our successors are going to need to have. And then we need to define the roles of the existing leaders, who's going to be where, redefine the roles of the responsibilities of them as well as family members. And, I've had this happen too, where there's a family member that's graduating from college or has been working in another organization or whatever, and now the family feels it's time to bring them in. So where are they going to bring them? What are they going to do with them? I worked with one organization, and the young man is extremely intelligent, extremely bright, just really on point, but they threw him into a vice president's role. He's not ready for the vice president's role. And he doesn't necessarily always have the trust and respect of the rest of the organization. And he doesn't know what he doesn't know. So it's become a tough fit in that organization because he tries to tell employees that have been there for a really long time what and how they should be doing things. And they look at him as, you haven't earned the right to do that yet. There's a whole lot of work that has to happen around that. And again, the whole point of a lot of what I'm talking about today is leadership development and what is that plan? And actually identifying it, having a plan. In one particular case I had, the people working at the organization, when they brought in a son, felt that he didn't have any experience in this business. What they didn't know was that when another family member had previously owned it, he had come in and was working every summer there doing different things. But not everybody. Some of the people were new in the organization and they didn't know that. Some of it was just communication. So, we really have to think about these things when we're bringing them in, because we always want to hire the right fit. So, those are the three things we've been talking about. Those are the three things that we want to make sure that we're really doing. I'm not sure that's supposed to be there. Oh, that's kind of in the middle. Oh, that's kind of starting over. We're back on track.
All right.
Kind of. Well, that's not showing.
It's all right. It's all right.
One of the things, and this is one of the things that I learned when I was going through my certification in family business, is that we have to remember that birthright isn't, I'm not saying birthright isn't important, but leadership ability has to trump it. I've seen so many times where somebody comes in, they don't really know what they're doing, or they think they know way more than what they really do, because now they've gotten this new title. So basically what this is saying is, you've got to, sometimes, and we just have to have these conversations, just because somebody is a family member, and maybe they are going in to a higher position in the organization, people are going to look at them, they're going to have to dig a little deeper, they're going to have to work a little harder, and they're going to have to inspire people a little bit more. So that, that people have the trust and the respect. Because without that trust and respect, things just don't go well. So how do you do this? You have to have some very clear, specific goals on what you want this person to accomplish. Get other people involved. Get other executives involved. There's mentoring, coaching. Get people to maybe they do work in different departments in the organization if they hadn't been there before, so they have a better feel for what the business is. Yeah, everybody's plan is going to be different based on their experiences and where they're going to go. We've been talking about having a tool to assess a manager's strengths and weaknesses. There's two that I have used. The FIRO business actually did some of that with Dina's organization, and actually, the more I've used it, the more I like it. I use the FIRO business. It basically breaks down for somebody how they're going to how they view certain situations in like leadership and communications and dealing with peers and those kind of things. And so it starts to give the report that comes back from this is a report that I get that I can use to help coach them, and then a report that they have that they can look at and start to understand, where are the things I'm good at? What are the things that I need to personally build on? So the FIRO-B is a good one for that. For somebody that's at a little higher level than that, we use the CPI 260. And that gives them a broader picture, especially from a leadership perspective. Based on that, then, we have to have good feedback with the employee. It's okay to have areas where you need to develop. We all do. Every single person, I used to always say, doesn't matter where you are in the organization, when you part of your performance management system should be to point out those things that we can all grow in. And especially with as much change as happens in all of our roles and responsibilities. What it was it, and then how are you going to get there? Is there going to be coaching? Is there going to be mentoring? Is there going to be assignments? And I have another slide on that. But we also have to make sure that as part of our performance management system, we are tracking these things. And we are saying, yes, this is what we wanted, and here's the goals, and are we getting there? So that we can really assess the impact of what we're doing.
Debbie, we got about 5 more minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So leadership gap, again, this was kind of on another slide, but these are the I think it's 7 top areas where the biggest gaps are in leadership. So just to get us thinking about how do we look at an employee and how do we get them? Some of these things aren't something that you can just give them a textbook or a paper or send them to a training or whatever to learn. So who in our organization does it well? Who could help bring this person up to speed? What kind of things could we do? Work assignments, special projects, executive development, coaching, feedback, mentoring, maybe some team-based cross-functional learnings, getting them to actually learn maybe something in a different department. You've got the one that says, I don't need to worry about the numbers because I have an accountant that does that. But to your point, yes, they really do need to worry about the numbers. So, I've had, they get training for, the non-financial manager courses, just enough to get them really starting to think about that. And making sure that people that were going to move into these roles start to get to go to some of the leadership meetings and some of those types of things that they're going to be exposed to so that they can really start to understand what the expectations of the role are. Again, just some practices. We need to make sure that we have objectives set for everybody. They get feedback. It's consistent. It's fair. We've got some long-term rewards tied to that. A lot of people need to have incentives, so there should be some reward system there. And that we celebrate when somebody does do that. So, just 2 quotes that I like. There's 2 ways of exerting your strength. One is pushing down, the other is pulling up. And the greatest good you can do for another is not to share your riches, but to reveal to that person their own. So helping people understand, the value that they have, that they already have. So really, what we're talking about here is leaving a legacy. Businesses are going to endure or they're going to die depending on how effectively they plan for the future. And people have a tendency to just go in and do their day-to-day and they're rolling along and things are going well. And all of a sudden it's 10 years down the road. And they're thinking more and more about, that exit, but they haven't done anything yet. And then that's the ones that, it gets very difficult sometimes to move those on to the next generation or decide if they're going to sell or what they're going to do. the ones that survive have managed to recreate that energy. I think that's really important. Keeping that energy alive and the passion for the services or the products or whatever that we provide. And because even if it's a family business that's been around for a long time, it still has to have that entrepreneurial spirit and looking at what's the next thing down the line. Questions, feedback, takeaways.
A lot of this is planning things. Is there I guess without knowing where to start, are there frameworks for sort of planning, for example, leadership development of I don't know, maybe those, what would we search for or online if that exists, or it's a great idea, I just wouldn't know how to frame it, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a good question. Yes, there's lots of things you can search for. For how to develop leadership skills and look for those things. Really, I think the biggest thing is, where am I now? Where do I need to be? So there has to be clear job descriptions for people. There has to be the competencies outlined, so that you can start to look at. It's a gap analysis. Here's where I'm at now. Here's where I need to be. What do I need to do in the middle? So there's not a clear answer on that.
No. So clear job descriptions, looking at the people who are in those job descriptions.
And goals.
Yeah.
And
should they be
matching them
there?
up.
And if they shouldn't be there, can they be trained to be there?
Exactly.
And if not, can we find someone else to be there?
Exactly. And is there maybe something they're better suited to do?
Right.
Maybe they're in the wrong position. That's happened in businesses too. Anything else?
I think that the strategic planning idea might be another opportunity for, do you do workshops on that? I'm just kind of curious after you brought that up, Nicole.
We haven't yet, but that might be a good option for someone in the future.
That sounds like a topic to talk about. That's a good takeaway.
Anything else? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.